So, a little opinion piece for you this Sunday morning. I will occasionally get a comment or maybe an email because, it's attached to the channel. And there are some people that don't like Pathfinder or don't particularly like people who talk about Pathfinder because we tend to be passionate about it. I will say that. Heck, I've been playing for, less than a year and I made a channel about it because I liked it that much, even though I had no experience with YouTube before at all. However, I just wanted to get into maybe a little bit of backstory about my TTRPG experience and then talk a little bit about why I chose Pathfinder and why I continue to like Pathfinder. So, my name is Don. I'm trying to be the Sly Strategist, and let's go ahead and get into it. Now, my journey into tabletop role playing games started way back with original Dungeons and Dragons. I'm not going to tell you the year because that's going to date me so much, but I will say I played the original Dungeons and Dragons, and that was released in 1974. It wasn't 1974 when I started playing, I'll say that, but that is what I played growing up. I do remember distinctly my mother was very afraid of Dungeons and Dragons and how it could be satanic and all that religious element of it. So that might tell you a little bit about something of when I was actually playing it. But a group of my friends decided to get together and start playing. We do sleepovers and stuff like that and play Dungeons and Dragons. A lot of fun, loved it. Then I moved on to second edition and I continued to play that well into my 20s. And then I kind of took a little break. I Things changed within my life and I moved to different places, had different groups of friends. I did kind of hang around the RPG little element a little bit. I played World of Warcraft, I played Final Fantasy, I played Final Fantasy 14. So I did keep my toe dipped in the RPG type element of it, but not necessarily the tabletop RPG. And then I decided I wanted to get back into tabletop role playing games because of the social element. So I went out and I did what everybody else has done when you're first thinking about it is you pick up the Dungeons and Dragons Player Handbook, 5th edition. So I kind of figured that this would be the easiest way to get back into tabletop role-playing games. And where I live, huge city, there isn't a lot of Pathfinder in person, but there is Dungeons and Dragons. So this is what I initially started with. And then, or what I initially bought and was going to try to get back into tabletop role playing games with, and doing the rule book and setting up player characters and setting up sessions and all that other kind of thing. And then OGL happened. And I started looking at other systems. I started looking at large systems. I started looking at smaller systems. Here's the key thing for me. I needed to find a system where I could find other players to play. My particular friend group does not include a lot of tabletop role-playing game players. So I had to be able to play virtually. I did try to convince my friends to do it, but apparently I'm the only one who is willing to play it. I wasn't going to say geeky enough, and maybe I am, but that doesn't necessarily mean that tabletop role-playing games are geeky or anything along those lines. They're pretty mainstream now. Heck, there's movies about it now. But so I started looking at systems to play, and now there are various other smaller systems looked at. I looked at Dungeon World. That's a whole nother issue. I'm not going to get into Dungeon World. And then, I was looking at Pathfinder. So I went and got the book, and I always do the wrong shoulder. It is sitting back here, and I started reading that book, and I liked it. It was a lot of what I remembered, but it was very specific. It was just like everybody else probably thinks of when they see that initial book, and the remaster is working to overcome that, is it's an over 600 page book. So you're like, holy crap, what am I getting into? But I actually ordered that off Amazon, not Paizo. I've switched over to that where I pretty much buy stuff by Paizo because in general, I don't need the first day release of it since I have all the rules. And I also understand now that everything, 99% of things at the very least, are on Archives of Nethys. So if I really want to look at something, I can go to Archives of Nethys and find it in general. But And I started reading through it. I started reading through it, and I liked it. I liked the system. I liked the amount of thought that went into all the different situations that could come up. I did think it would be difficult to learn the system, but in thinking about that, I was thinking, is that really that much different than learning this? It might be different with some of the other TTRPGs that are rules light, or the role playing, tabletop role playing games that generally don't have as many rules and are a bit more freeform. But those are harder to find other players for unless you have a friend group that likes doing that. Unfortunately, I don't have a physical friend group that likes doing that. So it was either this or Pathfinder, and I chose Pathfinder. And I do most of my gaming through virtual tabletops, and that is what most of my experience is with virtual tabletops. Now I want to go into a few things about Pathfinder. Now, when you start Pathfinder, you're presented with this. You're presented with this. So I do understand a little bit in the remaster when they're saying that it can be a little bit intimidating for a new player. But as you kind of go through this and you realize, oh, well, the game mastery guy's in here as well. So that's a huge section of it, as well as just how clear everything is. It does make the transition a lot better, or even just learning no transition whatsoever, just learning from scratch. However, I will not even try to lie to you and say it's not a intense learning process in order to learn the system. There's a lot to it. Heck, I made a channel about it because it is so hard. And I find that by making videos about things, I gain a deeper understanding into it as I'm doing the research. So one of the reasons why I do this channel is simply because I like learning the rules. I love going through all this stuff. I like the fact that there's kind of a rule for everything, and it does make it easy. Is it more expensive than a third party or a smaller tabletop role-playing game? Yes. But is the support there in order to do that? I feel there is, simply because there is a rule for everything, and I like them. I like them enough to make videos about them. So that would be possibly my number one reason, is there is a lot of support both for the players and the GM in the core rulebook. There's not a lot of guesswork. There is not a lot of need for homebrew. If you want to homebrew, totally cool. And there are some things that we do in my games that are homebrew, but there's not the need for it. If you want to do homebrew, at least, and this is my personal experience, once again, this is opinion video here, so this is just my opinion, but a lot of homebrew is if you want a specific flavor or a specific mechanic that isn't provided for by the rules, or there are parts of the rules that are a little bit confusing. A good example of that would be some of the subsystems, like in truth, and I did a video on it, the infiltration subsystem is pretty intense. And that was a pretty hard video to put together. Oh, I don't want to say hard. It was a meticulous video to put together because there is so much to it, and I needed to make sure I explained every point of it. Now, I like those kind of things in general, but it is a very intense system without a lot of need for homebrew. Because of that, I think that, and this would be point number two, with all that preamble to it, point number two is Pathfinder with this book, and I always do the wrong shoulder, the Game Mastery Guide back here. It gives the GM the support they need in order to run the game properly without having to come up with a bunch of rules on the spot that can introduce some inconsistencies. Some people might not like that kind of direction, and I get it. Then there's nothing wrong with that opinion at all. It is just something that I happen to like specifically. So it's one of the reasons why I like Pathfinder. And then I'll announce at the beginning as opposed to doing a preamble. And then there is a third reason why I like Pathfinder, is that there is a lot of pre-made content as well as third-party content available for it. If you don't have a lot of time to create worlds, create campaigns, create monsters and encounters, and come up with maps and figure out how to get all that stuff into virtual tabletop and prepare all that stuff, there are very well done pre-made adventure paths for you. There is also a plethora of options available on Pathfinder Infinite and other places to go, Drive Through RPG, all the other places that are out there in order to get additional content for your Pathfinder game without you having to spend a lot of time creating things. If I could have the time to spend to create and make my own world and make my own adventures, I would love to do that. I'm not sure I'm creative enough to do that, but I would love the thought in my head of doing it, but I don't. So, although once again, and this would be actually, this is a specific complaint I've gotten, is that how expensive these things are. Now, for the amount of work that's involved, I don't want to diminish that at all. There is an argument, there was an argument at least on Reddit, which we can't see now, which is totally cool, but that the amount of work that goes into the manuals and the adventure pass and all that kind of stuff, we actually get a pretty decent deal for this type of content. However, I do understand it's still a cost and not everybody can afford to pay that. Heck, I always, sometimes I have to think when I'm looking at my little checkout thing on paizo.com, do I really need this right now? But I usually buy it anyways. But you do have that thought, do I really need this right now? Do I really want to spend $100 something on 4 Lost Owen books? And then I go ahead and do it. But I do get the fact that there's a lot of cost to it. To me, it is cost versus the amount of time I have in order to enjoy the system. So to kind of summarize those 3 points, number 1, I needed a large enough game system to have a decent online presence in order for me to be able to play virtually, because I don't have a good friend group locally who would want to play that game. I have friends that want to do other things, but not very many people want to sit around and play on an actual table. So I needed that online community in order to do it. 2, the rule support for players and all the different things that you might want to do, as well as support for the GMs. And then 3 is the amount of content that's available for the system. And the quality of that content is exceptionally high. Now, I would say one of the other big things I really like Pathfinder is just the sheer unabashed inclusivity of it. It makes no bones about putting that front and center, that it is a very inclusive game, be it some of the deities and some of their interactions, be it some of the items that are in the game, the way that they celebrate Pride for this month on their community blog and celebrating their people that they have at their company that work for it, the way that they've incorporated trigger warnings and things in order to make people more comfortable during the game, and instructions for a GM how to do that in your game, I think is outstanding. And I think that is a fantastic element of the game. I'm not saying that other game systems don't do this, because they might, but for such a publisher, I mean, they're a fairly large publisher in the TTRPG space, to be so unabashedly inclusive, I think is fantastic. Now, I don't want to paint a totally rosy picture and say I don't have my problems with Pathfinder. There is no perfect system, but I do feel that Pathfinder is the best system for me personally, and it might not be the best system for anybody. Truthfully, there's not a whole lot wrong with 5th edition if that's what you like to do. There isn't a lot wrong to do with any other system if that is what you like to do. So I don't want to complain and say that other systems are horrible or so on and so forth. They're not. This one just happens to be the one that speaks to me the most. But let's go heading into my problems with Pathfinder. Now, considering what my second point was as far as player and GM support, this might sound a little bit contrary to that, but let me explain. So my first problem with Pathfinder is the complexity. It is a lot. It's a lot to get. And I remember one of the first things, and as a matter of fact, you'll see it coming up, I think, because I already have it recorded. One of the first ones that really, really confused me quite a bit was what exactly difficulty class was and how you came up with it. As a player, not even as a GM, because I didn't see it being explained very well. It's in this book, and I kind of show it when I do the video. So I don't want to say it's not in the book, but when you are presented with this much stuff, it's hard to find. I will say what I like about the system is because the system makes sense. You might hear them say, how balanced Pathfinder is. Part of the reason why I think it's balanced is because once you get the system, kind of everything else makes sense. Once you learn, for me, in truth, it was DC. It could be something different for someone else. It could be making player characters and then all of a sudden getting, oh, that's what the 4 kinds of feats are, and that's why they're different. Or it could be maybe spell casting, spontaneous versus prepared. Maybe there's some aspect of Pathfinder that you get. Once again, I'm telling you my experience, someone else's might be different. But once I got one thing that was kind of bugging me, once it made sense to me, almost everything else, I pretty much could guess at the answer. And when I read it, I was right. Meaning that once you get what they're trying to do and where the system is trying to go, then I think the system makes sense. You just have to hit that key point where your first obstacle and then you understand it, all of a sudden everything else makes sense for you after that. That was my experience, is I just needed that one little boulder to get out of the way that was sitting in my brain and preventing me from comprehending the system. And once that was out of the way, then I kind of got it. Does that mean that there aren't still things that come up that I do wrong? No, heck, I get corrections on my videos because there are things that I'll state wrong. And then I try and fix it. I'll cut the section out, or I'll put notes in a comment or in the description on what I did wrong, and I try to give credit to the people who did correct me. And a matter of fact, I love corrections. So if you see it, please give it to me. But generally speaking, there's nothing particularly game breaking that just rocks my mind anymore about the system. I do not claim to know everything about it, and I'm sure there'll be things in the future that really mess with me a little bit until I get it. But as it stands right now, once I learned that one thing and kind of got into, oh, I see where they're going, I see how they're thinking, then the rest of the system made sense to me. But it is a super complicated system. And for me personally, it was a super complicated system until I had a breakthrough-ish type moment, and then it became a lot less complex. The second thing that I possibly don't like about Pathfinder is, yes, it's expensive. There's no doubt it's expensive. If you want to get all the hard copy books, it's going to cost you a bit. Now, I did a video on how you can get these things lower cost, be it free, public libraries, online libraries, PDFs, non-mint books, Archives of Nethys, which is free. But sometimes you just want the physical book. And in truth, I'm one of those people that even, like I have this here, well, I got it through the Pathfinder bundle, but by that I mean the PDFs. But some of the other books I usually have, if I have a hard copy, I probably have the PDF as well, because it is so much easier, especially when you're playing online, to go to the index in the back, find out what page number it's on and go to it, than to be sitting there when you're playing virtually, because remember, I play virtually, and to be sitting there on your microphone and people are hearing that because you're rifling through a book trying to figure out what the rule is. So the cost is an issue. For the amount of content that we get, do I think it's a fair price? I do. I'm not saying that it is overpriced. I'm just saying it's an expensive hobby. I don't think this is better. I think this is the same way, but do I think some of the independent systems or some of the other tabletop role-playing games, especially the ones that aren't so combat focused or are a lot more role play or theater of the mind, I'm sure those are probably cheaper, but there is a lot more time that needs to be invested in for that. So it's a time versus cost thing, and it depends on how much you value your time versus how much the thing costs. So second thing is, yes, it is an expensive hobby. It really is, and that's no getting around that. And the third thing is not necessarily specific. I don't think everybody will run into it because I don't think everybody does this. But I will say this. I am trying, and I'm in it a little bit, Pathfinder Society. You know what? And we can actually kind of expand this a little bit. I'll expand it a bit. If you go to the whole Paizo website, it's a bit slow in the modern sense of what websites present to you. I have pretty darn good internet speeds here, and the Paizo website takes about 10 to 15 seconds. Any particular page will take about 10 to 15 seconds to load. Now, this to the more specific, what is my third point? Pathfinder Society is incredibly difficult to get into. And I don't mean that it's hard to understand, because it's not. I just mean getting through that site. The how to get started page is fantastic. That is laid out very well. There's a lot of information. I mean, when you log into your user and you have your characters, it's a slow website. It is a very ancient looking website. Does it work? Sure. It's just slow. And if you are like me and you have to play virtually, then that slowness does affect you. If you play Pathfinder Society or Starfinder Society at a physical table at your local gaming shop or with your friends and you do it that way, I'm sure it's a lot different. But if you are playing online, it is a laborious process. And although the Getting Started guide does explain things fairly well, once you get into that website and start looking at the non-intuitive layout of that particular page, of all those pages actually, it is a little bit hard. It's a great system. I love the adventures. I love the bounties. I love the quests. The boons are pretty cool. There is a lot to really like about it, but that back end process of it is challenging for some reason, and I don't specifically know why it needs to be that way in 2023. Now, once again, this was just an opinion piece, and this is my opinion based on my experiences. Everybody's going to have their own experiences, and everybody is going to like the game, hate the game, be indifferent, like this system better, wonder why I'm not playing this particular game, or wondering why other people don't play this particular game. This is just my experiences and why I like it. There are very specific things I like about Pathfinder. There are things I don't like about it, without a doubt. However, I feel like for me, it is the best system. But there are tons of other systems out there, and they all deserve to be played. Even if it is just the creator who created that system and his group of friends or her group of friends, or if it is a small community that likes the content that they put out, that's fantastic. It is absolutely fantastic. Every game deserves to be played. However, for my own personal experience, I happen to like Pathfinder, and I like it so much, I created a channel for it. So, will my content necessarily be objective compared to other things? I try to be, but there's no guarantees that it is. I made a channel about Pathfinder. So, don't expect a whole bunch of objectivity, but I also don't want to sugarcoat it and say I love everything about it, because I don't. There are some things that I don't like about it. And every time a new book comes out or a new subsystem comes out, and I'm kind of expecting a little bit with Remastered, maybe not to be so intense, but because there are new subsystems coming out and new systems coming out. And once again, every time they come out with a new book and there's a new Kingmaker with that particular weird system they have in there, I haven't played Kingmaker. I have just read it. And so I don't have I haven't physically gone through it yet, so I don't want to bash it too much. But there are these additional systems in there that are a whole nother layer of complexity that can be added on top of stuff. So there's nothing wrong with Pathfinder, but it is the best system for me. But everybody has a right to their own opinion. And if you want to share them, you can feel free to share them. I do hope you like this particular video. And if you did, feel free to like, subscribe, or hit that notification bell to see more videos as they're coming down. You know, that's that thing that anybody on YouTube has to say. It's mandated that you do. But regardless of what you do, I hope you have a great day and happy adventuring. Thanks.